I'm Rachel Moore. I'm 34, live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and most of my days are spent in a lab or behind a screen. Today, though, I'm driving to my grandfather's estate for the annual Moore family reunion, which, if we're being honest, feels less like family and more like a corporate showcase wrapped in brunch. The estate sits just outside Chapel Hill, a grand colonial house with white columns, a circular driveway, and a lawn that's always too perfect. My cousins will be there in linen suits and sundresses, their LinkedIn titles practically stitched into their smiles. Everyone will pretend to care about each other's lives while waiting for their turn to brag. I know how this goes. Olivia will talk about her private equity deal, Uncle Jay will mention his new condo in Aspen, and my mom will smile politely while silently wishing I'd chosen a more respectable path. I've attended these things for years, quietly sipping my coffee while someone makes a joke about me still doing that tech thing. They've never asked what I actually do. Not once. They just assume I'm stuck in some startup phase, like I haven't grown up or figured out how to live in the real world. The funny part is just this morning, I got an email confirming that Forbes will be putting me on their next cover. I read it twice alone in my kitchen, standing in front of the fridge with toast in one hand and disbelief in the other. Then I washed my plate and packed my overnight bag like nothing had changed. Because nothing really has. Not with them. To the family, I'm still the cousin who turned down a corporate job to tinker with biotech in a rented lab, the girl who never quite clicked into their world of suits and structured smiles. I parked near the guest slot, but far enough to avoid the usual questions about the old hybrid I use for appearances. It's a decoy, a sort of armor. No one questions what they don't think is worth noticing. Inside the dining room is already alive with laughter and polished cutlery. There's a smell of cinnamon rolls and heirloom tension. Everyone's seated in their usual places, the unspoken social map still fully intact. I slide into my spot at the far end of the table behind a floral arrangement large enough to block me from half the room. Olivia is already holding court, tossing her hair as she describes the ocean view from her new Miami condo. She's wearing that confident glow that comes from always being told she's winning. I nod when people look my way, but mostly stay quiet. It's not that I don't have things to say. I just learned a long time ago that saying them here doesn't change anything. They listen with the kind of smile that says they've already made up their minds. Still, I keep showing up, not to prove anything, just to remember what it feels like to stand in a room full of people who never really saw me. Because that cover, that headline, waiting to go live, it's not about revenge or recognition, it's about truth. And sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truths. They just don't need to shout them. So I stir my coffee and wait for the next round of stories, wondering if this will be the year someone finally asks what I've been working on. It probably won't be, but still I came. I watched Olivia glide into the room like she owned it. She always had that ability, like the air bent just slightly around her presence. Hair perfectly blown out, subtle designer labels. A confidence polished by years of praise and private school debate teams. She barely looked at me before making her way to the center of the table where the family naturally made space. They laughed before she even finished her sentence, eager for the next impressive thing to clap at. I sat at the edge, my coffee growing cold as I listened. Olivia was everything this family believed in. Harvard MBA, now vice president at a private equity firm that catered to tech investments she barely understood. But that didn't matter. She said the right things in the right tone, and that was enough for them. She was halfway through describing a yacht party in Miami when she caught sight of me. Her eyes didn't linger, just a quick scan to confirm I was still in her words doing my little science thing. I smiled politely, then looked down at the email on my phone again. Forbes. Cover story. Confirmed. I didn't say a word. My parents sat 2 seats away, nodding at everything Olivia said like it was gospel. My father had his arm draped over the back of my mother's chair, his laughter low and approving. My mother adjusted the pearl earring she always wore to these events and chimed in, just enough to stay relevant. They never asked me how work was going. Not really. If I mentioned something about the AI system we just licensed to a global vaccine initiative, they would nod like I'd shared a recipe. Their interest never went beyond polite confusion. They still thought of me as their quirky daughter, who took apart clocks and built software in the garage. They didn't understand that I'd built something real, something massive, and I stopped trying to explain it years ago. Olivia turned toward me with a tilt of her head, that familiar smirk forming like muscle memory. She asked if I was still running experiments in my basement, which got a chuckle from Uncle Dennis. He said something about how I must be the smartest broke person he knew. More laughter followed. I nodded, said it was going well. That seemed to satisfy them. They didn't ask more. They never did. My mom reached for her wine and mentioned how proud she was of Olivia's recent property acquisition. Olivia smiled and told us all about the penthouse she closed on with a view of Biscayne Bay. I kept quiet thinking about the Series C round we just closed. It valued Helix Nexus at over $3.7 billion. They didn't know the name of my company. At one point, my aunt leaned over and asked if I had ever considered moving to Charlotte. Said there might be some solid junior analyst roles at a firm her son worked for. I told her I appreciated the thought. She meant well. They usually do. Olivia caught my eye again across the table. She raised her glass and said something about how lucky we were to have such a smart family. She winked in my direction and added that not everyone could turn their hobby into a life. I smiled. Not out of agreement, just to end the moment. In my head, I saw the Forbes headline, Rachel Moore, the woman behind the future of biotech. But instead of speaking it out loud, I folded my napkin neatly across my lap and asked someone to pass the butter. They all assumed I was staying in that small apartment near downtown. They assumed I was barely scraping by, chasing one grant after another. They didn't know about the research park. They didn't know about the federal contracts, or the clinical breakthroughs, or the platform that was quietly transforming how the world understood genetic risk. But I knew, and sometimes knowing is enough. The truth didn't need to be dragged out and displayed like Olivia's real estate portfolio. It didn't need a slideshow or applause. It just needed to live inside me with enough weight to keep me steady when they tried to push me off balance. Later, when the conversation shifted to someone's golf handicap and a cousin's internship at a hedge fund, I excused myself and stepped outside. I needed air and space. I leaned against one of the porch columns and scrolled through my email, again rereading the Forbes confirmation line by line. They were flying out next week for the shoot. Editorial team, lighting crew, hair and makeup. The whole thing. I didn't feel giddy. I didn't even feel proud. I just felt calm, like something that had been buried too long had finally found room to breathe. From inside, I heard Olivia's laugh again, sharp and bright like clinking glass. I stared out at the magnolias along the edge of the lawn and let the sound wash over me without reacting. I didn't need to interrupt her. I didn't need to defend myself. I had built something they couldn't imagine, something they'd never see until someone else told them to look. And maybe that was the lesson. Sometimes the world won't believe you until someone else does first. And sometimes, even then, they won't really see you. But that doesn't make the work any less real. So, I stayed quiet. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because the moment was already mine. They just didn't know it yet. The second course had just been served when Olivia leaned across the table, her wine glass resting delicately between her fingers. She smiled at me, like we were in on some private joke, but I already felt the familiar sting in my chest. She asked if I was still living in that same old apartment near the freeway, the one with the peeling balcony railing and chain-link parking lot. Someone chuckled. I think it was Uncle Jay. He made a comment about how admirable it was that I was still so grounded, so humble. The words floated across the table like praise, but they landed like dust. Thin, dry, meaningless. I took a slow sip of water. My fork grazed the edge of my plate. My mother looked down, busying herself with a napkin. My father cleared his throat and reached for more butter, as if the question hadn't happened. Olivia didn't stop there. She asked how my little science project was going. She said it like she was referring to a middle school diorama, not a biotech platform now embedded in federal healthcare models. I nodded and said it was steady. Then I smiled like I meant it. She raised an eyebrow and said it was sweet how I stuck with it. That not everyone had the courage to follow a dream even when it didn't pan out. I think someone laughed again. I didn't check. I felt the weight of my phone in my pocket. Earlier that morning, I had opened an email from an Apple executive confirming their acquisition interest. A few hours before that, I had received the final layout from Forbes for their August cover. I hadn't told a soul at this table. They wouldn't have listened anyway. Across the room, my cousin Mark started talking about his bonus. Someone else mentioned a new Tesla. I cut into a piece of chicken and chewed slowly like I had nowhere to be and nothing to prove. But then Olivia spoke again. This time louder. She said it must be strange watching people your age move forward while you're still tinkering in a basement. She said it like a compliment, like she admired my dedication to being stuck. Her smile tightened as she spoke. I placed my fork down, careful and quiet. I met her eyes. She blinked, waiting. I could feel the air shift like the room was holding its breath. I said I didn't live in that apartment anymore. I said I hadn't in years. I mentioned I had moved into a private compound just outside Durham one with a level 4 lab and secured access points. I said it evenly, almost casually, like it was no big deal. Olivia stared, the room went still. I added that I had been invited to speak at 2 medical innovation summits and that I had just turned down a third. I didn't say it with pride. I said it because it was true. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. My father folded his arms and stared at the centerpiece. Someone's fork scraped too loudly against a plate. Then I said the thing I hadn't planned to say. I mentioned the Forbes cover. I said they were running a profile on Helix Nexus and that I would be their lead story. I watched the words land like quiet thunder. No one spoke. For a moment, all I could hear was the clinking of ice against Olivia's glass. She looked at me like she was trying to understand a joke she wasn't in on. Then she asked if I was serious. I said yes, that the shoot was scheduled for next Thursday and that they were flying the team in from New York. I didn't mention the valuation or the waiting offers or the new patents just approved. I didn't need to. Uncle Jay tried to laugh again, but it came out wrong. He said something about how media loves a good underdog story. I looked at him and smiled without moving my face. Olivia leaned back in her chair. She asked what the company even did. She said it like the answer didn't matter. I said we designed AI tools that streamline genomic data for personalized treatments, that our system had reduced clinical trial timelines for cancer drugs by nearly 40%, that we were under federal contract and preparing to roll out a vaccine compatibility layer across 3 continents. Someone at the end of the table dropped a knife. No one picked it up. My aunt, the one who always told me to smile more, shifted in her seat and asked if I'd ever thought about applying for a real job, just in case. Something steady. I smiled again. I said I was doing just fine. The tension in the room coiled like string pulled too tight. It wasn't explosive, it was quiet, but it stayed. Olivia tried to rally. She brought up her firm's latest investment. I nodded. Then I told her their predictive software ran on our architecture, that her firm had been licensing our tech for over a year. She blinked. No one laughed this time. I picked up my fork and took another bite. The table had gone oddly quiet, like the laughter had run out of places to land. I didn't look around. I didn't need to. Inside, I felt the slow burn of something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Not pride, not victory, just a quiet knowing that I had built something real. The truth didn't need to be shouted. It just needed room. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had that. I slipped my phone back into my coat pocket and quietly folded my napkin beside the half-eaten dessert. The voices at the table were still tangled in polite chatter, trying to stitch the mood back together after what I'd said. No one looked at me as I stood. The hallway leading out of the dining room was lined with old family portraits, all polished frames and stiff poses. I glanced at them as I passed, wondering if any of those faces had ever felt the way I did now. Maybe not invisible, just unseen in a different way. The foyer was empty, the marble tile gleaming under soft light. I opened the heavy front door and stepped into the late afternoon, the air cool and still. Behind me, laughter flared again. It sounded distant now, like a show I'd stopped watching. I didn't walk to the guest lot. I circled around the side yard, following a gravel path that led beneath a stretch of oak trees. Their branches arched above like a canopy, and just past them, tucked out of view, sat my car. A matte black Taycan, sleek and silent, waiting. Sliding into the driver's seat, I felt the gentle hum of the dashboard as it lit up. The leather smelled new, clean, familiar. I rested my hands on the wheel and exhaled slowly, letting the tension in my shoulders ease. My phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with a subject line, Final Forbes confirmation, feature live at 9 a.m. EST. I stared at it for a moment before locking the screen and placing the phone face down on the console. No one had asked what I actually did. Not once during the entire brunch. Not even in passing, not even out of pretend interest. They didn't know our AI models were helping cut diagnostic errors in oncology labs by nearly 30%. They didn't know we'd partnered with 2 federal agencies to develop rapid response health tech. They didn't ask, so I didn't tell. I eased the car into gear and pulled slowly down the path, gravel crackling softly beneath the tires. At the edge of the estate, I paused. Through the trees, I could still hear the soft murmur of voices and the occasional pop of laughter, but I didn't feel tethered to it anymore. The road back to town curved through long stretches of pine and quiet fields. I rolled the windows down halfway and let the wind thread through the car light and cool against my skin. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of something better. I thought about every time they had laughed, Every moment they dismissed me with a smile. I thought about how often I'd swallowed my frustration to keep peace, and I thought about how long I had let their version of me sit between us like a shadow. The truth was, they didn't care to ask because they'd already decided who I was. That's what hurt most. Not the judgment, the disinterest. But sitting here now, hands steady on the wheel, I felt something else too. Peace. Not the kind that comes from winning, the kind that comes from letting go. I didn't need them to understand. I didn't need them to clap or nod or post about me online. I had built something that mattered. I had poured years into a vision no one else saw. And now, the world was starting to notice. Ahead of me, the road opened up wide and empty. The sun was beginning to dip low across the horizon, coloring everything in soft gold. I let the moment settle into my chest. For a long time, I had tried to translate my success into a language they could understand. Titles, salaries, cars. But none of it really meant anything to them unless it looked like theirs. So I stopped translating, I just built. I thought about the interns back at the lab, the ones who stayed late and believed in the work. I thought about our researchers analyzing genomic drift patterns that could lead to breakthroughs in rare disease treatment. I thought about the nights I stayed up tweaking code while the rest of the world slept. All of it worth it, even the silence. At a red light, I glanced down at my phone. Another message had come in, a photo mock-up of the Forbes cover, my name across the top, the tagline beneath it, "The quiet founder who's reshaping medicine." I smiled, not wide but honest. Then the light turned green. Being underestimated doesn't mean you're irrelevant. Sometimes it means you've been given space to grow without interruption. Sometimes it means no one saw you coming. And that can be the best kind of freedom. One week after the reunion, I was skimming a business tech article over coffee. A small paragraph caught my eye. It mentioned a predictive analytics breakthrough credited to a firm Olivia had just joined as lead strategist. They were praising the accuracy of a platform they'd recently adopted, one built on a custom AI framework designed by Helix Nexus. I blinked, then leaned back in my chair. There it was. Her latest brag-worthy success was built on my architecture. She had no idea. She had stood across the table from me, smug and dismissive, while her firm's quarterly wins were being driven by code I had written. I let out a breath that was half disbelief, half quiet satisfaction. I didn't rush to tell anyone. I didn't forward the article or screenshot the paragraph. I just bookmarked it and went back to work. Later that day, one of our engineers forwarded a request from a client marked high priority. A licensing issue. Same firm. Their access had been auto-suspended after they missed a renewal window by 24 hours. I read the chain and noticed Olivia's name in the CC line. The next morning, my assistant handed me her voicemail. It was clipped and rushed. Something about a system outage, an urgent need to restore data flow. She asked if someone from Helix Nexus could respond within the hour. I didn't. By afternoon, another message came through. She used words like critical and high impact. She ended it with, "We really value the relationship." I let it sit. Her firm would resolve it. They had protocols. The system would go back up once the paperwork cleared. But in the silence between those messages, I pictured her at her desk realizing she was dependent on something she had never respected. I imagined her scrolling, piecing it together, slowly connecting the platform she'd flaunted with the cousin she had dismissed. The irony was almost too clean. Poetic justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a missing login and a quiet name at the bottom of the vendor contract. Sometimes it's knowing that everything they thought they had built on their own was actually borrowed. So I finished my tea, answered other emails, and moved on with my day. I didn't need to respond. The system would. My phone rang just after lunch. I didn't recognize the number at first, but something in me already knew. When I picked up, I heard my mother's voice, soft and careful, like she wasn't sure what version of me would answer. She said she had just seen the article, said it was beautiful, said she had no idea. Her words came slow, like they were trying to undo something too old to name. She asked why I hadn't told them, why I'd kept it to myself. I let the question settle before answering. I told her the truth. I said they never asked. There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing. I imagined her standing in the kitchen, maybe holding the phone with both hands like she did when she felt small. She said they were proud, that she was proud. Then her voice caught just slightly, like the words didn't fit as easily now. I told her it wasn't about pride. I said I didn't build Helix for applause. I built it because I believed in what it could do, because it mattered even if no one noticed. She was quiet again. I didn't fill the silence. Finally, she said she was sorry for not listening more, for not knowing how much I had carried alone. Her voice cracked in a way I didn't expect. I didn't rush to comfort her. I wasn't angry, but I wasn't reaching back either. Some things don't need to be mended, just acknowledged. I told her I was okay, that I had been okay for a long time. I had just stopped trying to be understood in a room that never tried to understand me. Another silence. She asked if we could talk again sometime soon. I said maybe, not to be cold, just honest. Because I wasn't looking to fix anything. I had already moved forward. I had just paused long enough for her to see where I'd gone. The studio lights were low and even casting a soft glow across the stage. The CNBC anchor smiled as she adjusted her mic, her voice friendly, but precise. I sat across from her, hands folded calm. Behind the camera, producers gave quiet signals. I took a breath and nodded when prompted. This was just another conversation, one I'd waited years to have. She started with the headline, Helix Nexus, a $5.7 billion valuation, quietly built in the background by someone no one expected. I listened, then answered slowly. I said it didn't happen overnight. That success for me looked like trial runs, late nights, and a lot of silence. I said the work spoke long before anyone did. She asked how no one had seen it coming. I said some people only see what they expect. They measure potential by volume, not depth. By polish, not progress. She nodded. The camera stayed on me. I kept my voice even. I said I never set out to prove anyone wrong. I just believed in the work, and eventually that belief built something real. After the interview, I walked off the set, the air cooler in the hallway. My assistant was waiting just outside the studio, tablet in hand. She told me my parents were downstairs, Olivia too. I paused for a moment, then I shook my head. She understood without asking twice. Tell them I'm in meetings the rest of the day. I said it gently, not out of anger, just clarity. They didn't need to see the office. They didn't need the tour or the conference room or the security badge with my name on it. The story had already reached them. The rest wasn't mine to fix. I stepped into the elevator and watched the floors climb. When the doors opened, I walked past the main hallway. The office was quiet, focused. Inside the glass walls, teams clustered around models and data maps. Researchers whispered over coffee and laptops. A project lead raised her hand when she saw me and gave a small wave. I nodded back. This place had become its own kind of family, not loud, not always easy, but built on shared vision, not shared names. I passed the lab window where a new compound was being synthesized. I saw one of our junior engineers take a note, eyes sharp and certain. She reminded me of me years ago, except she already knew she belonged. At the end of the hallway, I paused at my office, floor-to-ceiling glass, a view of the city, quiet hums from the server room behind it. I placed my phone on the desk. There were new messages waiting, but none of them needed an answer right now. I turned and looked out the window, watching as clouds moved slowly over the skyline. Not chasing anything, not hiding either. Success didn't change me, it just made me visible, and now I was finally standing where I had always belonged. If you've ever been the quiet one in the room, the one people talk over or talk past, I see you. I know what it feels like to bring something real to the table and watch it be ignored. To spend years building something meaningful, while others assume you're just wasting time. It hurts. Not in the loud, obvious way, in the slow, invisible way that makes you question your worth even when you know better. I spent a long time wondering if I was the problem. Maybe I wasn't loud enough or flashy enough. Maybe if I explained myself better, they'd finally understand. But the truth is, some people don't want to understand. They want to keep you where it's comfortable for them, and that's not your fault. It takes strength to keep going when no one's clapping. It takes even more to stay kind and steady when every part of you wants to prove them wrong. I used to think I needed to fight to be seen. Now I know I just needed to keep building. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Focus doesn't mean lost. You don't need their permission to do something incredible. So if you're working on something no one gets, don't stop. If you've been underestimated for too long, keep going anyway. You don't owe the world a spectacle, just truth. The best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living in your purpose and finding peace without needing to explain it. If this story touched something in you, I hope you'll share your own. I'd love to know where you are in your journey, whether you're just beginning or rebuilding from scratch. You're not alone. Sometimes the people who ignore you today will need your help tomorrow. But even if they don't, your value doesn't change. It never has. You are worth betting on. Keep building, keep choosing the quiet power that lives inside you. And when it all comes together, you'll know. Not because they finally noticed, but because you never needed them to.